Yeah, my name's Hunter.
And then if you could start by telling us a little bit about your childhood.
Oh man. So I grew up in a military family. By the time I was 6 months old, my dad was in the Air Force. Moved around a lot, and I think like my childhood started pretty good. I was the first of four kids. I'm the oldest, and you know, when I was like a little kid, like my dad was my favorite person in the world. Um, like I always looked up to him. I always wanted to like wear his army uniforms and like his boots and walk around and try and like flopping off of my feet and stuff. But as I got older, I think my dad started facing like some more stress, and he got deployed to the crisis in Bosnia, and then I mean beyond that point, like he was kind of like a different guy for a long time, and I think that like I know he grew up in an abusive household, and so he started just getting really, really kind of angry a lot. And so from the age of like 6 on, it was like always just this competition of like, I have to be the best I can possibly be. There's no like, am I enjoying playing sports or am I enjoying going to school? It's like, you will get straight A's, you will be the best on the team, like, or there's going to be consequences for that, to the point where it was like, like I was afraid of him. I was afraid of like his anger. I was afraid of his uh, like how unpredictable he could be. And so I really just found myself from the age of about 6 to like 13, just trying to be whatever he felt like I had to be, like trying to be the best at everything that I did. And I really started to kind of grow like resentful about that too. And being the oldest, I also felt like I had to like protect my younger siblings from the same things that I was facing with him, and I took a lot of that responsibility onto myself. Like I felt like, if he was angry or he was gonna lash out, that he needed to lash out at me and not at them. And so I mean, like I can remember like arguing with my little brother in the car on the way back from a restaurant. I must have been like 8 years old, and apparently we had pissed my dad off enough that he pulled the car over and he's basically just like, get out. And I think he thought I was gonna like freak out or just say, "Oh, I'm sorry" or whatever. But I mean, I got out of the car and it was like, 8:30 at night, dark outside. I was a good 3 miles from the military base we were living on, and I mean, he made me walk all the way back by myself in an area just outside of East St. Louis by Scott Air Force Base. And so that's like one example of this sort of like low key trauma that's building, right? Like there was never anything where it's like he knocked a tooth out. But I mean, he definitely put hands on me, and he definitely put hands on my siblings, and I think a lot of it like relates, like I said, back to his trauma and what he was dealing with. But by the time I got to be about 13 years old, like I really had enough, um, and I started to get really rebellious. So we had just moved back to the St. Louis area from Omaha, Nebraska, and uh, I'm transgender. I was born a female, and my entire life I grew up wearing like boys' clothes. Thankfully, my parents were understanding at least enough that like they allowed me to express myself in that way, but I don't think they really fully grasped like what being transgender was, or like that was even a possibility for me, and I don't think that I did either. But at about 13 years old, I have all of this home trauma going on, and then I have all of this trauma around like kids are starting to recognize like what the difference between boys and girls are. Like girls are supposed to dress this certain way. They're supposed to be interested in getting a boyfriend. They're supposed to want to wear makeup and whatever. And boys, on the other hand, are playing sports. And, there's all of these sort of like uh, things that you're supposed to do to fit into the norm. And I didn't feel like I fit in there either. And so I found myself feeling like I wasn't safe at home. I wasn't safe at school. I really started to kind of like internalize a lot of that feeling of like not being good enough, of being inferior from like everything that I had going on with my home life. And like straight A's was never enough. Why wasn't it 100%? You can score the winning goal. Why didn't you score two on the hockey team? You know what I mean? Like, and so as a whole, like I started to really sort of like resent myself and dislike myself. And so at the age of 13, I smoked weed for the first time. And it was in Illinois, and it was very much like, it's not like weed in Colorado where it's kind of like normal. Like, yeah, okay, you don't want a 13-year-old smoking weed, but like they're probably not going to run into like cokeheads and heroin addicts. In Illinois, it was very much like, I'm smoking weed with people 5 or 6 years older than me, and they're also doing coke, and they're also doing heroin, and they're also doing, you know, LSD and a lot of harder drugs. And so very quickly, I realized that to me at the time, it seemed like these are the people that accepted me. I found like, it felt like I had finally found somebody who was okay with me being as strange or as weird or as flawed or whatever I felt about myself, as long as I just got high with them, right? And so around the same time, I also had developed 3 herniated discs in my lower back from playing competitive ice hockey. And the doctors, this is in like 2004, the doctors were on their pain medication prescribing spree that went on during that time, and they gave me oxycodone. And so the first time I ever took it, I remember just feeling like, this is what I've been looking for. Like, this is what's been missing in my life. Like, everything just melted away. I didn't feel like the pain that I was feeling internally. I didn't worry about like what was going on at home. Like, I could just lock myself in my room and just zone out and just finally feel like, okay. And so very quickly, what was me like just taking them as prescribed spiraled into me like sneaking and trying to take 4, 5, 6, 7 of them at a time. You know, going into doctor's appointments and probably like expressing that I was in more pain than I actually was, just to get them to like up the prescription. You know, and I think my parents really started to freak out at that point in time, and they got me into some psychiatry appointments and some counseling appointments because they were trying to figure out like what's going on with my kid, you know. And I had started like, you know, wearing all black, and I wanted to like draw Sharpie tattoos on my arm all the time and whatever. Like I was angry. I was an angry kid, and I was under the influence of something all the time. And so of course doctors then said, the psychiatrist said, oh, this child's bipolar. And so that kind of started this cascade of psych medications that, you know, like, we're going to put you on these meds during the day so that you're like awake in class, and then we're going to put you on like these meds at night so that you go to sleep, you know. And at any given point in time, I was either tapering onto or tapering off of probably 3 or 4 psych meds at the same time as I was taking all of the oxycodone. They started giving me Valium for muscle spasms in my back, so that was like my introduction to benzodiazepines. And then I'm also like sneaking out at night and getting high.
How old were you again?
At this point, I was 14. So a year had kind of elapsed at that point from when I first smoked weed to where I was already on all of these pain meds. And like, I mean, it was a fast slide for sure. And right around the time of my 15th birthday is the first time I got put into a juvenile psych facility. My parents basically put me in a car and said, you are going to this place, and drove me to Louisville, Kentucky, and put me into the acute side of this juvenile psych facility, where I was supposed to be for 28 days to get stabilized on some kind of psych meds for this bipolar diagnosis that I had been given. And I remember getting to like the 27th day and being like, okay, I'm finally going to go home. And then my parents being like, well, actually, we put you in their long-term program. And I remember just being so upset and like fighting it and being like, I don't want to be here. You know, the staff at this place in Kentucky were legally allowed to like physically restrain children, like 14-year-old kids. They were tackling them. They had 300-400-pound bouncers. That was their evening job. They would go work as a bouncer in a club, and they would talk about it, and then they would come to work during the day and physically subdue a child who was mentally ill. And so all day in front of me, that's what I'm seeing happen. They're giving kids, you know, Thorazine shots in their leg and whatever. And I was like, this is not where I want to be. But I wasn't really left a choice, unfortunately. And so I spent 3 more months in that facility. and basically went to school there. Was put through again like another battery of psych medications to try and get me to, I don't even know it at that point, stop being a teenager, like stop having all of these other issues that were under the surface that nobody wanted to talk about, you know. And so I got out of that program, and I went back to the same environment that had me in such a messed up headspace to begin with. And so, it was like it took me maybe 3 weeks before I was back out getting high and doing stupid crap. But at that point, like I really didn't care anymore. I was really angry. I was really resentful towards my parents for locking me up basically, and I didn't want to look at like what was causing me to be in so much pain. I don't think I was like mentally equipped at that point in time to be able to do that kind of like introspection and understand like what was going on underneath the surface. And so I just medicated it away. I continued to stay on the opiates, and this is around the time that St. Louis was experiencing like a heroin epidemic as well. So my best friend's older brother was basically the biggest heroin dealer in town. And I remember at one point I was trying to buy weed, which was pretty difficult to get at times for a 15-year-old kid, and couldn't get any. And I remember her brother offered to sell me some heroin, and I bought it. And so I snorted it for the first time, and it was like that oxycodone feeling of like this is home, but like 100 times stronger. And from that point forward, I think it took me maybe 6 months before I was injecting it, like on a daily basis. I was sick without it. It was really bad, and I was seeing like a lot of my friends' older brothers' friends were dying from this stuff, and I remember people were literally saying like, it's good if people are dying from it, and it was like cool to feel that way. And I think it was a whole bunch of teenagers that just didn't understand how to cope with what was going on around them, and so they decided like, okay, I found all of these people that accept me, let's all get high together. And so by the time I was 16 years old, my parents put me into another inpatient center, and in spite of me reporting like, hey, I'm doing heroin, I am also doing like coke, I'm on all of these psych meds, I'm still taking these prescription painkillers. They were still very insistent that like I was bipolar, but now I was also oppositional defiant disorder. And so, again, just more psych meds, no real therapy. I remember like in that rehab or that psych center, they had decided it would be a good idea to like show us the movie Blow and the movie Party Monster. And like, I mean, if you've seen that movie, either of those movies, it's like 100 minutes of party your life away and then like 10 minutes of consequences. And I remember just watching those movies and just being like, you only live once. Like,
seems worth it.
Yeah, like, right? Like, I'll probably die before I get that far anyways. And I mean, those were like conversations I was having with my friends. Like, we're going to be a part of the 27 Club. We'll be lucky to make it to 27. And it was like, okay, because I think just internally I was in so much pain. And I was like becoming this person that I also didn't like, on top of all the other things that I already didn't like about myself. I would lie to the people that I cared about. I disappointed my younger siblings. I was really kind of a piece of crap. I stole from my parents and stole what I had to get money for drugs. And, I think I almost like hoped that I didn't see 27 years old, because I had so much wreckage even at 16 years old that like I couldn't see my way through to ever being okay with myself. And so I got arrested for the first time when I was 16. My brother got in my face and was yelling at me, and I shoved him, and my dad called the cops, and I got charged with a domestic assault. Spent like a night in juvie. That didn't wake me up. I had a friend die of an overdose. That didn't wake me up. And my senior year of high school, when I was 17, we were selling Adderall at school. We had all, me and 5 or 6 friends had all managed to get prescriptions for Adderall from our psychiatrist, because of course our parents have all of us in these, going to these psych doctors and whatever. And we all wound up getting busted towards like the end of the year. and I wasn't there the day that they did like the raid and they searched everybody. I was already suspended for something. I don't even remember what. But I came to school the next day, and I had all these text messages saying like, "Don't bring anything to school." You know, they searched everybody. They found all of our pills and whatever. And so I went to school with what I thought was nothing, but I was so careless about my drug addiction at that point that I had a razor blade and a straw in my wallet. And they searched me 3 times that day before they found that. And I was given the choice one more time, like, you're either going to go to jail or you're going to go to another inpatient center. And so I found myself in, the third inpatient treatment facility. This one was in Austin, Texas. Their laws are a little different down there, so at least I didn't have to witness, like, grown men tackling children and whatever, and shooting them up with drugs to get them to calm down and whatever. It was a little bit more of a therapeutic place, and I think it was the first time I found myself like wondering if I wanted something different for myself. I did go through a lot of therapy in that place, and I remember talking about like the abuse at home and my issues with feeling inferior and a lot of that stuff, and I was able to really like bring a lot of that up and talk about that. But I had kind of this like feeling like I was missing something, like there was something else that was bothering me, and I couldn't really put my finger on what it was. I got out of that place like really kind of committed to like, I'm going to stay clean. I'm going to go to NA. Like, I'm going to try and do something different. I got enrolled in community college and started going I think I went for like 2 months before I relapsed. And, since that point in time, all the way up until about 23, there was, I don't know, 4 or 5 more stints in like adult rehab facilities, 28-day programs. I tried taking Suboxone. I tried taking methadone. Nothing lasted longer than 3 months for me. By the time I was 23 years old, I was in Colorado Springs, and I was regularly committing felonies to feed a heroin addiction. I had witnessed at least 3 people die of an overdose in front of me at that point. And I had like had dope brought to me in the hospital and like had the cops find out and stuff, and I went to jail and I met this girl there, and this is like sort of what starts to change my life. Like I really like fell in love with this girl. Like I really cared about her. She actually wound up bonding me out, and we were talking like, we want to stay clean. We don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm tired of like getting somewhere to live or like getting nice things in my life and then just losing it because I'm getting arrested or losing it because somebody steals it or whatever, and I remember, I got the judge to give me a bond reduction to go to rehab. And so I went to a rehab up here in Denver for 28 days. I had already been clean for almost 5 months at that point because I had been in jail. And I got out of that rehab and I went to an Oxford House sober living. And, I stayed clean for a number of months. The girl that I had fallen in love with got out of jail as well. And, we were living together. I moved back down to Colorado Springs. We were living together. We were clean. We were trying to do the right thing. And I was having the hardest time finding a job because I had 4 felonies on my record at that point. And I remember just saying like, well, we should maybe just sell some dope so that we can like afford the rent this month. You know what I mean? And, that's a huge mistake. Any addict will tell you at that point that like the second you have it in your hand, that's it, right? Like you're not going to sell it to pay rent. You're going to do it. And so we wound up relapsing, really kind of running amok for like 3 months. And one night, it was her birthday that night, and we got a bunch of dope and we were gonna do some of it. It was from the same people we always got it from, and she wound up ODing. And I called 911 and I was giving her chest compressions, and she woke up that night, thank God. And we went to the hospital, and they were like, well, were you trying to kill yourself? And she said no, and so they let her go. And I remember going back to our place and saying, like, we need to stop this right now. Like, we need to get some Suboxone and we need to get off of the dope, right? And she, her ribs were like really bruised from having CPR done on her. And so after about 24 hours of trying to detox, she goes, we'll detox when my ribs are healed. I can't do this right now. And if you don't go buy some dope, like, I'm going to leave and I'm going to get it myself. And so I was like, okay, fine. Like, we'll get through this, whatever, and then we'll detox. And 4 days later, we bought dope from the same person we always did and shot it up. And I was like facing away from her, trying to find a vein because my arms were so jacked up at this point in time. And I just remember feeling her like slump over behind me. And I turned around and her eyes were still open. And like, I could tell like, okay, she's not breathing. And so I start like giving her CPR, put her on the floor. Her son was actually upstairs. He was staying with us that night. We were down in the basement, and I called 911 and I yelled up and just said, you know, Cypress, let the paramedics in when they get here. And he's like, well, what's going on? And I just said, like, don't come down here. And I remember giving her CPR, and she started to like vomit in my mouth as I'm trying to give her CPR. And I remember watching her pupils just like die, like get bigger, and remember thinking like she's gone, you know. It took the paramedics almost 15 minutes to get there. When they finally got there, they repeated the same procedure I had been doing for the previous 15 minutes, and eventually tried to find a vein to give her Narcan, and were unable to do so, and wound up pronouncing her deceased. And so I had to go upstairs and basically tell her son that his mom was dead. And that same night I found out that I had an active warrant for an identity theft charge. And so I was arrested, taken into the jail in Colorado Springs. Her son went back to his dad's house. And thankfully my mom bonded me out that night. I think she realized that, you know, maybe if she hadn't, that I probably would have tried to kill myself. And I was out for about a week. I had gotten some Suboxone. I was trying to detox. And I was already on probation, and my probation officer put out a warrant for my arrest. So I was rearrested, taken back into the jail, spent about 3 weeks there, and then was given what is almost unheard of at this point. I was given I can't remember the name of it, like a pass, basically. They allowed me to go out. My mom took responsibility for me so that I could go to Danny's funeral. And I remember thinking, like, leading up to the court date where I was given that really privilege, right? I remember thinking, if they don't let me out, I'm going to kill myself here. If they do let me out, I'm going to go and get the rest of the dope that's at the house, and I'm going to kill myself while I'm out. And so they did let me out, and I did go get the dope, and I went to the funeral, and on the way back to the jail, I had my mom stop at a 7-Eleven, and I shot up in the bathroom, and I took basically an entire bottle of my brother's Seroquel XR 300 milligram pills. By the time I got back to the jail, I was barely conscious. By the time I made it into booking, I guess I was so out of it that they put me into medical on a suicide watch. And somehow, you know, 30 300 milligram Seroquel XRs and a half a gram of heroin didn't kill me. I remember waking up in a dry cell, what I assume is like 3 days later. And not only was I still alive, but they hadn't drug tested me yet. The girl who had died, her mom worked as a nurse in the freaking jail. And so I think, you know, she didn't want a charge to be put onto my mom for allowing that to happen, even though like there's nothing she could have done to stop it, you know. But they finally drug tested me after me being in there for like 4 days, and I wound up coming back clean. And I just remember sitting in the maximum security pod of the jail, thinking like, I can't even do that right. I can't even succeed at committing suicide. And I remember just feeling like so beaten down, like fine, I just give up. Like, it was truly, for me, that was my rock bottom. That's what it took. was for me to lose somebody that I love more than anything in the world in front of me in an incredibly traumatic way, and then try and kill myself and not even be able to do that, right? And so I took a plea deal for the identity theft case, as well as all of the violations of my probation at that point, for 4 years in prison, with a mandatory 3-year parole tail. And within a month of the suicide attempt, I was shipped off to the women's prison in Denver, Denver Women's Intake, basically. And so I spent, 3 weeks in their intake there, in their maximum security pod, where you're out for 1 hour a day. And then they sent me, thankfully, to the medium security prison down in Pueblo, La Vista. And I was in such a bad spot at that point that, like, I didn't know how to deal with anything that was going on. But, I was angry, and I got in a lot of trouble in prison, and I got sent back to DW and put into the maximum security pod for a while. And then I found myself in TC. The therapeutic community. And if I'm talking too long about my childhood, please let me know, because we can go ahead and you can ask some questions. But
as far back into your childhood, what would you say were your your dreams or aspirations?
I think when I was really little, I wanted to be an astronaut, man. I really did. Like, I went to space camp when I was, like, I don't know, 10 years old. And I thought it was the coolest thing. My grandfather was a fighter pilot, so I always really looked up to him. He's always been kind of like my role model,
So the next question, I know we went, you talked kind of about your relationship with your dad, but this question is, a little bit more about that relationship, and since we already know bits and parts of it, if we could go into more how that relationship felt as a youth when you were in it.
Yeah.
And maybe how it feels now.
So, as a kid, it was like terrifying. I was terrified of him. I always thought that he was like the most powerful person that I knew. He was in the military. He was a trauma nurse, and so my relationship with him as a kid was very much just like, I am powerless over him. I am powerless against anything that he does. And I really resented that. But I think it was also it was incredibly terrifying to just know that, like, at the drop of a hat, something that I would do any other day might set him off. And, I might be trying to dodge a fist or something. And so, it was hard. Like, I wanted to love him because that's my dad. And, I think that that's a pretty normal reaction for a kid to have. But at the same time, it was like, I couldn't stand the way that he treated me, and I couldn't stand the way that he treated my siblings. And I don't think I was, like, emotionally equipped to understand that, like, he's also a product of his environment in some aspects, and that there was a lot more going on behind the scenes that I wasn't really privy to, and so to kind of segue into, like, what my relationship with him is like now, or how I feel about it now, I think I found a way to kind of forgive him. He grew up in an environment very similar to mine. His dad was in the Army. His parents didn't have a great relationship. And when they got divorced when he was like 8 years old, his mom went and married somebody who physically beat him on an almost daily basis. And I mean, he told me a story at one point in time, being 16 years old, that he went and got a baseball bat to threaten his stepdad, and that was the last time he ever hit him. You know what I mean? And so the parallels between his story and mine are very interesting to me. Like, and so I remember sitting in a treatment facility, after I got out of prison, and saying, like, if I want redemption, if I want to be forgiven, if I want to be able to become a better person, I have to afford him the same opportunity. Like, there is nothing about anything that I have done that I am justifying to some extent, or at least explaining through, what I went through growing up, and everything that he didn't also go through. And then some, I mean, he was in the military, he fought overseas, and so he has trauma as an adult too, you know. And so I just remember thinking like, I have to try and mend this relationship. And at that point, I hadn't talked to him for almost 2 years, the entire time I was in prison. And it's definitely been kind of rocky rebuilding a relationship with him. There's still some moments where, you know, I think we're both kind of unsure on how to conduct ourselves, and you know, there's a distance. But I would say now, like, when I have good news, I call him and I tell him about it. You know, and I would hopefully say the same from him when he has something good happen in his life. He shares that with me as well. And so I would say that it's not a perfect relationship, but it's far better than it's ever been.
How does that forgiveness feel?
Like a weight is lifted, like I can breathe, you know. And there was more forgiveness than just with my dad. I think like there's been a lot of forgiveness that I've had to do in my life for a lot of things, you know. And the more I am able to kind of let go of things that have happened to me, or maybe even things that I've done to myself, you know, the more I feel free to direct that energy towards something positive.
What about your relationship with your mom and how that relationship felt?
That one's complicated. So my mom has always been my biggest supporter. Um, you know, she and I were always very close growing up. You know, if I felt something, or I felt bad about myself or something, she was always the first person there saying like, you know, no, you are good enough. It's okay. You know, at the same time, I played the role of a counselor to her a lot. You know, she would tell me things about her life or about her relationship with my dad, that I was not emotionally equipped to deal with. I was way too young to be hearing some of the things that she would tell me about. You know what I mean? And so, um, you know, she was a closet alcoholic for the majority of my life, an extremely high functioning one. Um, she was a stay-at-home mom, so you know, I would find liquor bottles around the house and whatever, but she always to me seemed like the victim of the circumstance as a kid. It was always like, you know, if my dad wasn't acting so crazy, maybe she wouldn't be drinking or whatever, you know. And so I spent a lot of my childhood like trying to protect her in sort of an unhealthy way from things that were more her responsibility to protect me from. Um, and I think, you know, as I've gotten older, my eyes have been open to some extent to the fact that like she's not a complete victim of this. That, you know, her choices are her own, and as an adult, um, it was her responsibility to make some decisions that, you know, she neglected to. And so I'm still incredibly close with her. She's still my biggest supporter. She's always there for me, you know. But I think I remember being about 19 years old and just thinking like, having this moment of almost like disillusionment where I realized that like she's just like me. She's just doing the best that she can. Um, but also like being like, oh, nobody has life figured out. Like we're all just kind of finding our way through it for our entire life, you know. And that's where I think she's at, and I think that's where she'll probably be at, you know. Um, and
What are
so
what are the biggest things you take away from, you know, quote unquote, learn from your parents? It can be good, it can be bad, it can be anything.
yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I learned from my parents is just how to persevere, like how to be resilient. You know, how to take situations that are less than ideal and try and make the best of it. Like my parents didn't want to be married for the vast majority of the time that I was a kid, and they stayed married because they had kids. And I still have a lot of good memories from my childhood. You know, like fun things we would do together as a family, or like, you know, making sure everybody felt special on their birthday or whatever. And so, you know, I learned from watching them how to take a situation where, you know, maybe there's a lot of stuff going wrong, but how to still make that time valuable, and how to still make sure that like you're trying to prioritize the things that matter to you. Um, you know, how to find that middle ground.
Would you mind telling us about your first love and how that felt? It can be whatever you associate as your first love. It can be a person, hobby, thing, anything.
Oh man, that's a hard one. I would say there's a couple of things I could call my first love, right? Like ice hockey was a first love for me. I
Yes.
loved playing hockey. It was like it was something where I could finally just like let go of all of my rage and my anger and like channel it into something productive.
Yeah.
It was a way for me to like when I put hockey gear on, I also wasn't like a girl, if that makes sense. Like people didn't see me as a girl. I played with the boys and I played rough with the boys. And so, once I had the gear on, like I could be who I already felt like I was, right? Um, and I would get into fights and get thrown out and whatever, it's fine. Like if somebody wants to call me a slur related to women, like I'm gonna knock your head off. You know what I mean? And so for me, that was very like liberating to be in a situation where I'm seen for who I already feel like I am, right? Um, Conversely, like another first love would have been heroin, you know. But interestingly enough, like the theme is almost the same. Like I could just be who I am and not care. I didn't have to care about how people saw me or how I felt about myself or anything. Like I finally just felt that weight lift off of me of trying to like fit into the box that society wanted me to be in. And I think the overarching theme in my life and what triggered lasting recovery for me was just learning to accept myself. And I would say that every love that I've had in my life has in some way translated back to feeling accepted or feeling like I'm enough, you know.
What are some of the things you do to accept yourself and to have that same feeling that that ice hockey gave you, that even heroin gave you, which was almost like liberating, being yourself? Are you comfortable fully being yourself, and how do you do that?
I mean, I could say probably as recently as 2 months ago, finally, yes, I'm comfortable fully being myself. Um, you know, in early recovery, I realized that I was transgender, and it seems like so weird to say that like at 20, 25 years old that like I realized I was transgender, right? It had always been in the back of my mind, right? That like I'm in the wrong body. I remember being a kid and like looking in the mirror and like flexing, you know what I mean? And like standing like this, with no shirt on in the mirror and envisioning myself as like a bodybuilding type dude. And I never really put two and two together, but I finally came out as transgender and started saying like I want to be called Hunter. I want to use male pronouns. But it's been a really long uphill battle to get to a point where I have physically and socially gotten myself to the point where I feel comfortable in my own skin. Um, it took me a year and a half to even be able to get on hormones. I had Hep C from my addiction, and so before a doctor would prescribe me testosterone, they insisted on curing the Hep C because it could, damage my liver. But that's really expensive, and so it took a long time to get Medicaid to approve the cure for the Hep C. And then it's taken a long time for the physical changes to happen for me, where I present the way that I have always felt that I am. And then it wasn't until this last December that I was able to finally afford to get surgery on my chest to where I finally feel like when I go out in public, when people see me, they see me for who I am. And they treat me the way that society treats somebody that I already have always felt to be. Um, and so for me at this point, like what I do to accept myself is very much just maintenance. It's very much just like if I'm at work and somebody wants to treat me in a way that's inappropriate because of my gender identity, I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm not just going to take it. You know what I mean? It's things like making sure that I'm taking care of like my mental health and I'm acting in a way that um, I can respect. Like having that self worth, having enough, integrity to be a person that I respect, and just making sure that like the decisions that I make in my life are ones that I can be proud of, you know. Um, and so it's not so much, that the the therapy work of like talking through why I don't like myself anymore. Now it's just making sure that I don't do things that make me not like myself.
Tell me about your first loss or heartbreak and how that felt. What same thing, whatever you associate as your first loss or heartbreak.
Um, that's a tough one too. I would say my first loss would be the loss of my dad the way that he was when I was little. Um, that for me, I think evokes like the most intense feelings of loss. I remember like being a little kid, like 3 or 4 years old, and he would come home from work, and I would like run up, and he would pick me up and swing me around in the air and whatever, and it was this really good relationship where he was happy all the time. He wanted to like take the family to Disneyland and do all these really cool things, and like wanted to spend time at home. He would make sure he was home from work so that he could eat dinner with us and things like that. And then when that switch kind of flipped and he became a lot more angry and kind of withdrawn and spent more time at work and you know became violent and everything else, I think that's my first real like knowledge in life of what loss is or what it is to grieve losing something or somebody. And I think it's particularly hard in those situations because that person is still there, at least the shell of them, right? And so it was like this extended grieving process, I think, through the majority of my childhood of just resenting the fact that he had changed, wondering maybe what I had done to cause it, right? Taking that responsibility, onto myself when I shouldn't have. And then always just maybe hoping that like things would go back, you know. And I think I also learned the lesson of like change in life. Like life is a state of flux that most things in life don't last forever. And kind of learning that hard lesson of like there's good times and there's bad times, and how do you learn to appreciate the good times when they're going on without being afraid of the bad times that might be coming.
Who would you say first taught you love and how?
I mean, it's probably a pretty cliche answer, but I would say my mom. Just because her love has always been really unconditional. I came out to her as gay at one point. It was like, okay, like I love you. Uh, Mom, I'm addicted to heroin. Okay, I love you. Um, Same thing like, Mom, I think I'm transgender. Okay, I love you. Like, what do we need to do to help you? That sort of like, it doesn't matter who you are in the moment. It doesn't matter what stage of life you're in. Like, I love you as a person. That sort of no strings attached love that I think really you only get from a very select people in your life.
What's love to you now versus like what it was when you were younger? If those two loves are different, if we can compare the contrast and then how those two different loves feel.
Yeah. I think unconditional love is something that I want to word this in a way that sounds how I'm trying to say it, but it's not healthy. Truly unconditional love, in my opinion, is not healthy for the person who's giving the love, right? Because I have to love myself enough to, if somebody is treating me in a way that is not acceptable, to withdraw my love for them out of love for myself, right? I think that anything black and white at this point in my life is no good for me. So I love you no matter what, or I only love you if you do what I want, are both incredibly unhealthy, right? There has to be some level of like compromise and like give and take. And I think that love that my mom has shown me is very unique in that that's a love that you have maybe for your children, right? But I think that it would be incredibly unhealthy for me to have that kind of love for my significant other, or the people that I care about in my life, just because I've learned through experience at this point that like I have to love and protect myself the most. I have to be healthy for myself before I can be healthy for anybody else. And so, I think if anything, love has just gotten a lot more complicated. Um, there's so many things to navigate with it now that, what am I willing to accept and what am I not willing to accept? And, am I willing to allow this other person to work on themselves the way that I asked them to allow me to work on myself? And at what point do I draw a line? You know what I mean? So I think as a whole, it's just a lot more complicated.
What's a good day look like for you? Just like a general good day for you.
Oh man, going off roading in the mountains at this point, just getting out of the city, and uh, I'm not a hugely social person. I'm pretty happy by myself or with a very small crowd, and so just going up and being with nature and hearing the silence if you can do that, and admiring the beauty of what's up there and just getting that sense of serenity and calm and being able to slow down. Um, life is always moving so quickly, and I find myself striving for something all the time. Um, I'm not the type of person that does well just sitting still, and so for me, a good day is just being able to for just for a day to relax and recoup and allow myself to gather my thoughts and kind of experience that peace.
What about a bad day?
I mean, a bad day that is actually happening, or what would a bad day look
Like,
like?
what's a bad day and how do you get through it? Like,
Um,
generally.
I mean, I think a bad day for me at this point is like when I find myself in a situation where somebody's being really judgmental of me for who I am, for whatever facet of who I am that is, whether it's because I'm a felon or because I'm transgender or because I'm a recovering addict. I have a lot of parts of my personality that people take issue with, and a lot of parts of my past that people take issue with. And so I would say that for me, a bad day is finding myself in a situation where I'm forced to like defend my worth as a person, where I'm forced to, um, try and convince somebody to treat me like a human being. And unfortunately, that happens, you know, fairly often, with different levels of severity, I would say. So, how I really get through it, I think, is as cheesy as it sounds, it's just self-talk, man. Like telling myself over and over again, like, no, you are enough. Like, you deserve to be treated with respect. Like, you are worthy of redemption. Everybody deserves an opportunity to redeem themselves, you know. And I think at this point in my life, I've worked really hard to do that, and I think I've been successful in doing that, and becoming somebody that I respect, and becoming somebody that does the right thing and has integrity and tries to help other people. And so, reminding myself of that when I'm faced with a situation where somebody's treating me like I'm not, it is definitely my biggest tool.
What's a person or an event that shaped you, good or bad? How does it feel when you reflect on
I think the event that has shaped me the most in my entire life has been watching Danny overdose in front of me. You know, I I have this big tattoo on my chest, and it says "It took a funeral to make me feel alive," and it's a Nikki Sixx lyric, and it maybe that's also kind of corny, but for me, it's my truth, right? Like, it took me losing the thing I cared about more than anything in the world to finally recognize that, like, I needed to do something. Like, I needed to change what was going on, or I was gonna die trying. But that this was no longer working. Um, and I think it to this day it gives me motivation to be a better person and to make good choices and to strive to do things that are worthwhile, and to live my life to the best of my ability, because to some extent I feel like it could have just as easily been me. If I had been the one that had managed to find a vein first, it probably would have been me, you know. And so I've been given this gift of of like a second chance, right? Like this opportunity to live when somebody else had that stripped from them right in front of me. And so what kind of a person would I be to not seize on that opportunity and live to the best of my ability, the absolute best life that I can?
What's inspired you?
I think what inspires me the most is just seeing other people like me doing what I'm doing. Uh, Whether it's people in the LGBT community that are living out their life as who they truly feel they are, or whether it's people that have been in prison being successful, getting good jobs, finding a good career, buying a house, whatever it is, or if it's just recovering addicts, like, picking up another chip at an NA meeting, like that to me is incredibly inspiring.
What's been a humbling experience for you?
Um, a lot. I think I've had a lot of humbling experiences. I would say just realizing how hard somebody who has been to prison has to fight to just have a bare minimum quality of life. For me, has been incredibly humbling. Like, it's one thing when you're in there saying, like, I'm going to get out and I'm going to do all these great things, and I'm going to get this great job, and I'm going to go to college and get a degree and everything. But then what's been incredibly humbling is like having to actually fight my way through that and navigate my way through trying to do things like that. Even something as simple as like trying to find an apartment to rent is a nightmare. um, I'll go to 10, 12, 14 places and just flat out ask them if they would rent to a felon, and they'll literally say either one of two things: no, we don't, or put in an application and we can consider it. And then I look on their website and it like flat out says no, they don't. So they're gonna collect my money to deny me. You know what I mean? Trying to get a good job. Like, I can go work in a restaurant or work construction and get paid not very good money. But finding a job that actually pays like a living wage with a felony on your record is also incredibly hard. I've gotten very lucky. I teach a software engineering course, and thankfully they have made it a point to offer opportunities to people like me. That wherever you have come from is really irrelevant. It's what are you doing now. But they're the exception, not the rule. So it's just been really humbling to see like how far I have to go and how much I have to fight in the rest of my life, and just see that, like, that I have a fight ahead of me still as well, and that sometimes no matter how hard you fight or how hard you try, some people will still never accept you. Some people will still never give you a chance.
Go in your mind and think this life event can be mental, physical, or spiritual. Tell me about a time in your life that you can relate with the word war.
That's another tough one. Um, I mean, I think I fought a war against myself for most of my life. A war with my own internal negative thoughts about myself, and um, sometimes I think that to some extent I still do. Um, I think there's always a part of me that I open the Pandora's box of addiction, right? Like, I open that Pandora's box of like, oh, there's something out there that will just take everything away. And so I think for the rest of my life there will be a certain amount of like a war internally of, I want to be a good person and I want to do the right thing and I have all of these reasons to do so, but sometimes things get really hard, and that's when that battle kind of begins, of sticking it out and having the resilience and the fortitude to win the battle and live to fight another day.
Same type of question. Go in your mind and think this life event can be mental, physical, or spiritual. Tell me about a time that you can relate to the word peace.
I think every time I go up in the mountains and by myself, I feel at peace. I feel when everything is just quiet, including my mind, you know, and I just feel, I feel that sense of serenity. Like, I don't have to wake up and find out where my next shot's going to come from today. I don't have to wonder if the cops are looking for me today. I have a good life. I have a good job. I have a partner that I'm really dedicated to, who I love very much, and you know, she feels the same way about me. And so peace for me is just that moment of like, okay, I can slow down and just be for a moment.
Can you tell us about a truly difficult time in your life? How it felt, how you endured?
Yeah, I could probably talk about a few. I think probably the most difficult time in my life is outside of when Danny had overdosed, and grieving through that. I got out of prison and went to a therapeutic community here in Denver, and I spent 10 months in house there, and then I spent another 7 months in their outpatient program, and I graduated their program. But the last 2 months that I was in their program, I had relapsed basically behind their back. And I was using, still going to groups, still talking about my recovery, everything, because if I was caught using, I was going to go back to prison. And so I spent months of my life having all of this knowledge about myself, having come out as transgender, having completely really like worked down to the very core of all of my issues and like talked my way through them, and whatever else. And I was using with that knowledge of like, this is going to kill me. I don't want to be doing this, you know? And so most of the difficult times in my life, I would say, are self-inflicted, and that one's no different, right? And I mean, I eventually wound up, you know, my parole officer came to my house and found dope in my house, and I went back to prison for a year, and I just remember thinking like, thank God, like, it's over. It's over. Like, whatever this has to look like, if I have to go back to prison, whatever, like, I can stop now, and I can regroup, and I can stay clean. You know what I mean? And I think, you know, that they say like there's kind of a funny saying in the rooms, right? That like once you get some recovery, you can never go back out and use the same way again, right? And it's so true. Like, it was just,
No question.
yeah, like I hated myself more than I had ever hated myself while I was doing that, because I had full knowledge of what I was doing and what I was choosing to continue to do, you know. And so, I mean, how I endured through that at that point in time was mostly just because I think we as human beings, that's what we generally do. You know, no matter how hard things get, no matter how dark things get, unless we're willing to take our own lives, time goes by. Things change, and hopefully they get better, you know. That's one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my life is, if things are not good right now, if things are hard, if things look dark, if, you know, you're going through a tough time, the best thing for me that I can do is to just sit down for a minute, to just wait it out to some extent. Like, obviously take action in the things that I have control over, but a lot of it also comes down to just being okay with not being okay sometimes. Like, learning how to be uncomfortable and not self-destruct as a result of it, or act in a way that's unhealthy as a result of it, you know.
Can you describe that? Like moments when you do get those feelings of conflict, being uncomfortable, if you add the emotions in there, being sad, down, etc. And normally as an addict, the way to cope with that is to use. So how do you cope with those emotions, or how do you embrace those emotions?
The biggest thing I think is to talk about it with somebody. To not, I can think myself in circles all day long, right? Like, I can't come up with a better idea than my best idea, no matter how long I think about it. So I think definitely talking to somebody about it, generally somebody who can empathize with it and who is going to be understanding and not judgmental, you know, and just like being willing to be vulnerable and share how I feel in that moment, and be willing to be okay with like, I feel kind of weak having to do this, but like I understand also intellectually at least that like being vulnerable takes strength, right? And so, talking about it with somebody, and also, the self-talk, like reminding myself that like here's what you have to be grateful for. Like, yes, this portion of my life is difficult right now, but I have all of these other things to be grateful for, and like going through the list in my head, and in the process of doing that, I'm also reminding myself what I have to lose, and it doesn't even have to be anything huge. It can be something as simple as like, I have a job I can go to, right? Even if the job is the problem, like at least I still have a job. You know what I mean? So I think reminding myself of what I need to be grateful for is incredibly important too. And I also just feel like self-care that has nothing to do with the problem is really important too. So like making sure that I'm eating the right way, making sure that I'm like getting enough sleep, not staying up all night worrying about something, or I have a tendency to like try and Google things that are concerning me, and I'll be on the phone till like 3 in the morning if I don't remind myself that like, hey, you need to get enough sleep to be in a proper headspace to deal with the things that are going on right now. Um, Making sure that maybe I take my dogs for a walk, or I go to the park, or I go up into the mountains and find that peace for myself for a little while, and really prioritizing my own mental health through difficult times, and not letting that fall by the wayside just because there's some conflict going on.
Can you tell us about a truly joyous moment in your life and how that moment felt?
I think I think the most joyous moment, at least recently, that I can have is after having my surgery on my chest. I had to wear like a compression vest for about 3 weeks, and like obviously like there was like open incisions and everything else. And when I finally went to the doctor for like my post-op check after 3 weeks, and he said like you can stop wearing that vest, and I took that off for the first time, and I just like put on a t-shirt. uh, that was like a life-changing moment for me. It was like I'm no longer like physically trying to manipulate my body with like compression garments or whatever just to get people to like see me the way that I am. Like I took a look in the mirror, and I just remember being like, that's what I'm supposed to look like, you know? And so it was like liberating. Like finally I'm seeing, looking back at me in the mirror, who I already have felt like I am. Like finally I'm comfortable looking in a mirror. I don't look in a mirror and like avert my eyes from anything below my neck, you know what I mean? Because I think no matter how much like therapy and whatever I go through, and whatever, like to some extent, at least for me, having my physical body match the way I feel mentally is incredibly important. And you people can say like, oh, you need to just accept yourself the way you are or whatever. And for the most part, yes, I agree with that. Like I'm a little overweight, cool, right? Like I'm going to accept myself the way I am. That's one thing, right? Maybe I'll like eat healthier, work out a little bit, but I'm not going to like be traumatized every time I look in the mirror and realize like I'm a little overweight, right? Versus like every time I had to look in the mirror and see like female breasts, that was a whole other story. Like that was like a different level of like just accept yourself the way you are. So for me, it still is just incredibly freeing. Like I took my shirt off at a park the other day for the first time, and it was just like I was with my partner, and I was like, I can do this now. And it was just like freeing. Like, oh, okay, I can just be myself. And like nobody's gonna hassle me, because really looking at me, nobody knows anymore. Now it's my choice to tell people, right? Now I get the opportunity to let people get to know me as a person first, and a trans person second. Now I get the opportunity to be a human being in the eyes of the people that I interact with on a daily basis, and that evokes a lot of joy for me.
What keeps you up at night?
Oh man, coronavirus. No. I would say just concerns about the future for the most part. I would say, I've worked really hard to get myself to a point where like I have a good source of income. I have stability in my life, but I also know that like if this company I'm working for closes tomorrow, I'm gonna have a heck of a time finding a job. Like I have to disclose my background. Like they're gonna do background checks. I'm gonna have to explain to some person that barely knows me why they should hire me as a seven-time convicted felon over that person next to me with the same resume but no felonies. And so there's always that anxiety about the future and what it's going to hold and like what battles I'm going to have to fight next just to maintain the status quo. For sure. That always brings anxiety.
Sure. What keeps you going every day?
Oh man, I like my life. I really do. Like I have built myself a life that I enjoy. Um, I have things to look forward to on a regular basis. I have an awesome fiance who cares very much about me. I have two dogs and three kittens, and I just have a lot of things in my life that bring me like those small moments of joy and those small moments of gratitude. And so, I have a lot to look forward to.
I know in recovery programs, I mean, I went to AA for a little bit myself. There's a spiritual aspect to it.
For sure.
And I think that's where the power is in that program, is the spiritual aspect of it. Um, how was that for you?
Oh man, I like spirituality. I'm not a fan of organized religion. I think it goes without saying why at this point. But you know, I was like a proud atheist when I was like 19. Like I remember sitting in like a philosophy introduction to philosophy or like philosophy of religion. I can't remember which class in community college, and like that was my favorite thing every day would be to go into that class stoned and like argue with people about how God wasn't real, right?
Yeah.
It was like I like lived for that for like the few months I was in college. And then there's just been enough things that have happened in my life that, in my opinion, can't be a coincidence. Um, I mean, the biggest one coming to mind is just the fact that like enough Seroquel to kill a horse on top of heroin didn't kill me, right? Like, and that gives me this sense that like there's a purpose for my life, right? There's something, however minute in my opinion or whatever, there's something that I still needed to do, right? And so there's no way that I could reconcile that thought with this idea that there is no God, right?
Right.
And I think I've sort of just developed this faith that there's some sort of energy or plan or something, right? I don't know what it is, and that's okay.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I'm totally fine with being in the dark about most of that because I just feel like at this point, like it's probably more complex than I could understand, anyways. But I think I've seen people recover without a sense of spirituality, but even then they have like a higher power of some kind, whether it's like listening to the advice of other addicts or something. There's something outside of themselves that is helping them find that sense of purpose and that sense of peace and that guidance. So
Imagine you're in the hospital today with only hours to live. What would be your regrets, if any?
that's a tough one. I think everybody wants to say like, "Oh, I have no regrets." That's like the cool thing to say, right? But uh, I think I have things that maybe I would have done differently given a second chance, but I also think that everything happening the way it did brought me to where I am today, and I'm pretty grateful for where I am today. So, I can't say definitively if I would do something different. Like obviously it would have been wonderful had I not gone out and bought dope that day and Danny died, right? Like that's a horrific thing that happened that I take partial responsibility for. My choices contributed to that outcome. And I maybe I wouldn't have ruined my relationship with my family to the point that I did as a teenager, to where I didn't have anywhere safe to like figure out who I am. And I think I hopefully would have accepted myself sooner, right? All of these things, like if I had done this, maybe this could have happened, whatever. But then I also just think about like if I had done all those things right and like made all those right choices and you know all of that had happened, I think I would be a far different person than I am today. And I think that I wouldn't have as much perspective as I do. I wouldn't have as much empathy as I do. I wouldn't probably be as resilient as I am either. Um, if everything's easy in your life, you don't really have to learn how to be strong. So I think for the most part, I don't know if I would call them regrets so much as just like in hindsight, I could have done this differently.
So you're obviously alive and well. You did allude to maybe doing things differently. Um, do you feel that you can make amends? Which I did hear you verbalize that, but do you make amends with that reality of what happened? How do you make amends with that?
I think I think the 12 step like I let me preface this by saying I don't go to 12 step regularly, right? Occasionally I will go, but I do pick up a lot of like what they talk about in their program, and I use it in my life. And I think what it's referred to is like a living amends, where I've made peace with the fact that I can't change the past, right? And so it's pretty like worthless to wish I could have because it's just a waste of my time and energy. I think like in my opinion, any guilt that I feel or any shame that I feel is supposed to be a catalyst to get me to change something and then leave that emotion behind because it's toxic, right? And so the way that I make amends is to just on a regular basis like ask myself like is there something that I feel guilty about or is there something that I feel ashamed of doing and making it right if I can, and if I can't for whatever reason like physically cannot make it right, or maybe the wrong has been done to myself, then I be a better person that day and I'll be a better person than I am today tomorrow, and so on and so forth. And I allow that to be like my catalyst for growth, right? And so in my opinion that's the best amends that I can make to Danny. That's the best amends I can make to her son and to my family and to myself and anybody else that I have harmed or victimized in the past, you know, is to just be the very best person I can be every single day.
You told me what your dreams were as a kid. What are your dreams now?
I've been trying really hard to become a software engineer, man. uh, I would really like to work a job that I feel is intellectually stimulating and be given an opportunity to work in a career that allows me to constantly strive and try and grow and learn and be better, because that's what makes me happy. And eventually I really just want to buy a cabin or a house up in the mountains and live up there with my fiance and our dogs and however many animals we have at that point in time, and just have that peace.
You're the co-author of your life, but what's your picture perfect ending if you can envision one?
I think my picture perfect ending would be sitting on a deck on a beautiful cabin up by like Woodland Park or Estes Park, and watching the sunset and just sitting there with my fiance, 85, 90 years old, and looking back on our life and just smiling and remembering that like we lived a good one. That looking back and saying like it was worth it and I did everything I ever wanted to.
That's it.